Hello, sir. I'm Karunakaran, an IT professional from Bangalore. My question is regarding OPS. I have been following you on this issue, and I see you are one among very few people who is strongly fighting against this issue. And I also understand this is a very serious concern to the future of our nation. As you know, Karnataka state is on the verge of assembly elections, probably in the month of May. During this time, the state government employees union is trying to put all kinds of pressure on the present government to get this OPS. They are threatening to go on strike as well. And also I see the other political parties or opposition parties in the state have already promised to grant OPS if they come to power in the next term. So as you rightly said in the past, like if at all this present government or future government, they're going to grant this OPS, it will be a burden or a betrayal to the rest of the population and also to the future generations. So my question is, like, as a non-government employee workforce, how can we show protest to this? And how can we make sure our voice is being heard by these political parties or the government? Is there a union or what is the means we can show this protest? How can we support you in this cause? Yeah, please guide us. Thank you.
Thank you, Karunakaran, for that question. First we must understand the background. OPS is old pension scheme. NPS is National Pension System introduced by Vajpayee government in 2003-2004. Came into operation in all of India at the union level and state level, excluding the state of West Bengal. What is this OPS? World over, governments make efforts, make policies, and build mechanisms by which working people have some kind of a security after retirement. But remember, world over, wherever they do it, it applies to all employees, government or private sector. Remember another thing. In most of the countries outside of India, take United States, take Europe, take other countries, 95 to 98 and 99% of the people are in the organized sector with a monthly wage and a secure job. Therefore, any pension system we're talking about, it's only for the organized sector. Remember India. We only have about 10% people in private sector and public sector together in the organized sector. 90% have no secure job, no monthly wage. They eke out a precarious existence. This is the backdrop. So what do other countries do? Other countries, they collect every month from the employee and the employer. And in case of government employees, because government is the employer, the government pays X amount and the employee pays Y amount. All that is collected and put away in a pension fund. Every month the money is collected. In the United States, for instance, it's called payroll tax. 6.2% of the wage is paid by the employee, deducted from the salary. The same amount is paid by the employer, whether it's a private sector employer or the government. So 12.4% of the wage amount is parked separately in a pension fund. And that money, after retirement, is then utilized. Meanwhile, the money is invested. The income from that money is utilized. Despite that, despite the pension being fully funded, despite the budget reflecting the pension burden in the current expenditure today for the services rendered now in private sector and public sector, despite the fact it's applicable to all workers in those countries, practically everybody in the country, A, the amount is limited, B, there is right now actually a surplus in almost every country. That means the money coming in is more than the money going out for retired people. Despite that, many of those countries are worried. You must be hearing debates, future pension liability, future pension burden, the collapse of public finances, because with the demographic changes, the old age population increases and the working age people's population relatively as a proportion comes down. Fewer people contribute to the pension fund, more people draw pensions. So they are trying to see what can be done. Now, look at India. What is old pension scheme? It is only for government employees. Private sector employees do not have it. In any case, 90% of the workers in India are in the unorganized sector. Even getting a daily wage is a daily wage, unorganized, unaccounted, mostly cash, no question of any pension fund and pension. Out of the 10% or so in the organized sector, the government accounts for only X number. Probably in all of India, about 4% of the workers are in government. Of them, in the states, there are only about 2% or 2.5% of the workers in the country. Now, Vajpayee government brought in the national pension system. Before that, what happened? There was no pension contribution by the employer or the employee. There was no pension fund. Without funding today for the services rendered today, post-retirement, very high pension, index-linked pension, is paid 30 years later by our next generation because you're not showing in the budget, you're not created a fund today, you are burdening the next generation through taxes or debts. It's unusual. Nowhere else in the world does it happen. It also affects intergenerational equity. It is against our ethos. Our children are asked to pay for what we spend today without getting any value for that. If we are getting value from government servants today, we must provide for the pension today from our taxes, not our children paying through their taxes 30 years later. So it is unfunded. The burden is transferred to the next generation, and it is index linked. There are cases where a person who retired with a 10,000 rupee salary today draws and continues to draw for decades 50,000 rupees pension. As a result, in many states, about 14 to 15% of the total state revenues, 14 to 15 or 16% of the total state revenues are spent only on pensions. From 2012 to 2021, just 9 years, the pension burden in the states has tripled, become 3 times. From 1,45,000 crores, it has now reached about 4,07,000 crores by 2021. I don't have this year's numbers, but it's continuing to increase. Repeat, unfunded, open-ended, index-linked, long-term, legal liability from which government cannot get out. Burdening our children, making it impossible to sustain. Governments are going to go bankrupt, but they will not go bankrupt today. In a political climate where today and this hour is all that matters, tomorrow be damned. Winning today is all important. Let our children suffer tomorrow, let the country collapse tomorrow, it doesn't matter. We are so short-term in our approach that there is going to be a crisis after 5-10 years is something that's not touching us. Every other country, despite having funded pensions, enormous surpluses in the pension fund, they are very worried about the future. 25 years later, what will happen? India is pretending as if there is no tomorrow. That's a disaster. That's why the late Mr. Vajpayee as Prime Minister, he did something very, very far-sighted. We should be grateful to him. He brought in the national pension system. That means the pension is now funded by the employee and the employer, in this case, the government. The government of India was giving 14% of the salary, deducting from the employees 10% of the salary. States, half-half, 10%, 10%. It's put away in a pension fund. That money is invested. Any payment after their retirement will happen from the pension fund and its income. That means there is no additional burden on the exchequer, on the tax money in future. This is working for the past 18 years, since 2004, except West Bengal, which unwisely did not become part of the program. And West Bengal will pay a price in the long term. All other states embraced it. It's been working beautifully. And remember, it's only applicable to employees who were recruited after 2004. Because after all, the others were recruited before. And they came because of the old rules. That was the deal then. Therefore, you cannot change the rules midway through their employment. So only after the people recruited after that day, it applies to them. because that is the condition on which they were recruited. For 18 years, the pension fund is available. I think by last count, about 7,35,000 crore pension fund is now available. It's growing significantly. By 2035 or so, 2030 or 35, as the people who are recruited in 2004, they retire, there will be enough of a pension fund, enough income to take care of the future pensions. Until that time, the exchequer, the budget, future budgets have to bear it afresh because there is no fund available. We are in a good place, but we are in a country where a small number of vocal organized sector has abnormal power. They have the voice. The people at large do not understand what is at stake. What I explained today, very few people understand in the country. They have never thought about it. Very few politicians understand. And naturally, if I am the person in government, I want what is best for me. It doesn't matter if the whole country is going to lose because of that. It's fair or unfair is immaterial. What about the private sector employee working as hard, providing so many valuable services to all us? He's not asking for pension from the government like this. What about the unorganized poor who are eking out a precarious livelihood on a day-to-day basis? What are they getting? In some states, some small pensions are available. We're talking about a few thousand rupees, not tens of thousands of rupees. And it is not index-linked. It can be withdrawn anytime the government finances don't permit, whereas these index-linked pensions are legal liability. The government cannot withdraw. People don't understand this. Political parties before elections are like examination-going students. They're terrified. They're scared. In a first-past-the-post system like ours, maybe if I get 1 lakh or 2 lakh more votes, I'll win. If I lose them, I'll lose the election. It is this fear. And also the fact that the employees of the government are the ones who are at the polling stations. Therefore, if they're unsympathetic, maybe they'll hurt me. If they're sympathetic, maybe they'll help me out of town. So it is this fear. Not the concern for the public good or the next generation, but the fear of a few organized employees, vocal sections. That is driving some of the parties act recklessly. The union government under Vajpayee, under Manmohan Singh, now Narendra Modi, across parties, they have stood firm. They said we cannot go back, otherwise India will be destroyed, fiscal future will be destroyed. Many states, until now, all states, as I said, except West Bengal, they acted very responsibly, all kinds of parties. But suddenly, some parties have become reckless. Now, state after state, take Punjab. Punjab has the worst debt, 50% plus debt already. Punjab is spending the most money already for current expenditure, which cannot be controlled, committed expenditure, relative to its income. Punjab, Rajasthan, recently Himachal Pradesh, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh. These 5 states, apart from West Bengal, which already, as I said, did not embrace this scheme, they are now going back to old pension scheme after doing all the hard work because they're afraid of a few voters. They are not bothered about the people or the electorate in their states because electorate does not understand. They're confident. And the crisis they will face will be after 10, 15 years. Who cares who is going to be in power? It is this short-term calculus at the cost of the future of this country, at the cost of the next generation, the young people of India today, that is making some of these parties give up. It's a very dangerous thing. It's a very dangerous thing. Many states are acting responsibly even now. Tamil Nadu, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Orissa. Orissa, a poor state though it is actually a very well-managed state fiscally. In Kerala, until now. The western states of Maharashtra, Gujarat, and many other states, they've been acting very responsibly, in a very balanced manner, because they understand the future. They care for the electorate. They care for the next generation. But some states are falling in. And because some states are caving in, the other states also there's a temptation. So come election time, there's pressure. And the governments do not dare to speak the truth, come out with the full facts. But some states are doing it. Andhra Pradesh government has come out with details as to what will happen. They showed that if you go back to old pension scheme, the debt burden of the state, which is now about 38-40%, will dramatically increase to up to 210% of the GDP, whereas the norm is they should not cross 20% debt burden, 20% of the GSDP of the state. They will go up to 200%, 10 times what is permissible. The fiscal deficits will mount dramatically. Today, the deficit is about 2.53%. It will go up to 11-12% of the GSDP, not revenues. The total revenues are only 6-7%. The state's revenues are only about 6 or 7% of GDP. And on top of it, if pensions alone, because of old pension scheme, the burden goes to 11%, 12%, there simply is no money. There is simply no money in the kitty. State after state will go bankrupt and destroy the future of our country. The committed expenditure, salaries, pensions, and interest payments will exceed the total revenues of the governments. There's nothing else to be done. You just pay salaries and pensions, and you pay interest, and you have nothing else to do. Why do we have government? Government is there to meet our collective needs. What you and I cannot take care of as individuals and as families. We created an institution called government. We pay taxes to fund it, and we ask them to deliver that. Government is our agent to deliver what we cannot do individually. Public order, justice, rule of law, infrastructure, basic amenities like water supply. We pay for water supply, but somebody must provide for the water systems. Sewerage, stormwater drainage, then your whole management of the traffic and so on and so forth. Quality education, at least school education without out-of-pocket expenditure. Quality education for every single child. Good quality health care. 6 crore people are falling into poverty every year in India because of lack of access to health. Quality health care without out-of-pocket expenditure. And then to the extent that it is possible, to help the people in distress, welfare. These are the roles of the government in that order. If the government doesn't have money to do anything except pay salaries and pensions and pays interest, and already you exceeded the total revenue, it's a tragedy, it's a disaster. Everything has collapsed. So the danger is imminent. I have given a detailed explanation so that people actually understand what is at stake. Some people say, Dr. JP is opposed to employees. No, I was an employee camaraderie. I treated them as friends and colleagues, not as subordinates. Because I believe unless we all work together as a team, we cannot serve our people, improve the conditions of our country. But it does not mean that we fleece the rest of the society. The government is for the people of India. The government is not for the politicians of India. It's not for the bureaucrats of India. It's not for the judges of India. It's for the people of India. Those in government, employees, senior civil servants, the judges, the other functionaries of government and the politicians, they are all to serve the collective good of the country. So what can we do? First of all, the government of India has the power. Dr. Ambedkar and his colleagues understood the risks. We are a federal country. Many countries have wonderful rules. You take a country like Brazil, for instance. The constitution itself ensured that there is a golden rule. That means you cannot spend more than the revenue on current expenditure, day-to-day expenditure. That means you cannot borrow to spend on current expenditure. No revenue deficit. There are other rules in the constitution itself and by laws. There cannot be a primary deficit. That means after interest is paid, a primary deficit cannot be in excess of what is prescribed by law. The expenditure on welfare cannot be expanded or increased as you please without the source of funds. So many such provisions are made. So what we should make sure is that the pension money, if indeed the governments want to go for some other form of pension or more pensions, show it today, the current expenditure in the budget transparently. And we have the golden rule that the total current expenditure, not the development expenditure, investment in infrastructure, etc., but current expenditure cannot exceed your revenues. That means you cannot borrow to spend on yourself today. You can only borrow to build for the future. The Government of India has the power under Article 293. Without Government of India's consent, the state cannot borrow. The Government of India has the right and duty to impose conditions because ultimately the burden falls on government of India. All this is general government debt. There is no provision for a state to go bankrupt in India, unlike in America or some other country. Ultimately, whole of India is going to pay for the mistakes or the blunders committed by some states. Therefore, all of us, we have an obligation. The question is, what can we do? Please raise your voice. Do not remain silent. It's your problem. In India, what happens is, on issues like this, a small section of vocal people, knowledgeable people who know what is at stake for themselves, they make it into a big issue and make a lot of noise and bring enormous pressure. If a policymaker or a government takes the right stand for the future of the country or for the benefit of everybody, the future generations and everybody, they don't know what is at stake. Therefore, the politicians get at best meek and weak support, lukewarm support. But the opposition, the pressure from the sections which have an interest, a vested interest in a certain policy, in perpetuating status quo, or doing something for their benefit at the cost of the rest of the country, they are seen to be always very strong. Unless the rest of the people, for instance, the employees in private sector, in software sector, in the emerging technologies, and the general public, unless we raise our voice, understand, and make demands, whatever pension you have, you show it in the budget today. Have a pension fund like other countries. You cannot have unbudgeted, unfunded pension. B, you cannot borrow for current expenditure. So have certain rules, and the Constitution provides for that. Many countries have that. And demand that, ask for that. And if any party, any politician recklessly promises expenditure without the proper resource, proper funding, stand up, let people understand, and make them pay electorally. Because they're mortgaging your future, my future, our children's future, for their current temporary political benefit. To benefit a small number of organized sections at the cost of the rest of the population of India in a desperately poor country, where 90% are unorganized sector. We cannot afford that. Start an online petition, start public discussions in electronic fora, in social media, and formally organize responsible, creative, constructive, peaceful protests by citizens. Keep track of government expenditure. Let's all collectively put pressure on the parliament, on the union government, and on the states, and on political parties. I have every confidence that our political parties, our legislatures, despite all the political challenges we face, fundamentally want the good of India. They want better economy, they want to eliminate poverty, they want to build a better future for our children. But they are pressurized. They are terrified like examination-going students. Unless there is a countervailing pressure from citizens who understand what is at stake, there is a danger that that pressure alone will yield results for them at the cost of the country. It's like you have a wall. On one side, there's a massive mound. On the other side, there's no countervailing pressure. What happens? Eventually, that wall will collapse. So what do architects do? They also build concrete or mud with equal pressure on both sides, so the wall does not collapse. Now there is pressure on one side from a small number of vocal, powerful sections. But the rest of the people are a vast majority, 95, 96% of the people of India. Let our pressure be felt. Then the politicians will understand what is at stake. That they cannot take short-term decisions at the cost of the rest of the people because they have woken up. They too are voters. They too can punish us. And this voice must come from everywhere. I gave an elaborate answer to look at the bigger picture. A lot of statistics we can see there on the screen. We can have many more debates and discussions. There's not one thing which is not factual in what I'm stating. Everything is accurate. And this is all available in the public domain. But we must pay attention. We must go into detail instead of a superficial discussion. To my mind, let me pour my heart out. India is now on the verge of reasonably good economic growth for the next 20, 30 years. For a variety of reasons. Partly because successive governments have done a decent job. Some of the problems we overcame recently. Partly because the global climate is favorable to India. because people are mistrustful of China and they are looking for other options, investment destinations. Partly because we have vast human resources, though there are some problems. Partly because there's a lot of entrepreneurial talent in this country. We have an opportunity. But the single biggest danger to economic growth of this country is the health of the public finances. If the government finances collapse, if the governments are debt-ridden, if the expenditure is unsustainable, if we burden the future, that will be a death knell to the economic future of India, and we cannot afford it. We have far too many poor people, far too many unemployed, far too many who are not getting basic services. They deserve to be brought into modernity. We deserve to become a superpower. We need to give each of our citizens a dignified living, good quality education, healthcare, basic infrastructure, skills, an opportunity to get a productive employment and decent income and have honest, decent life, to fulfill their dreams, to exercise their freedoms. That's all the people are seeking. But if our governments act recklessly for their short-term political gains at the cost of the people of this country, that is a disaster India cannot afford. Thank you for your questions. Please offer your comments, your criticism, and raise questions for debate and discussion. And let us spread the message. There's no final truth. We have to keep at it. We have to go by evidence and logic. We have to respond to emerging situations. And we have to understand the global practices and our own past experience. We have to find constructive and creative responses to our challenges. I'm a great believer, and as you believe, that there are rational, practical, acceptable, sensible, affordable solutions to most of our problems. But we must think of them very carefully, based on evidence and logic, with goodwill, without hyper-partisanship, without illogical approach, without excessive emotion or sentiment. And we must adapt the best practices relevant to our conditions. And we must learn from our own past experience, good and bad. I wish you all the very best. Thank you.